fiction, then and now. I'm your moderator, Nancy Northcott, and we'll start with the panel introducing themselves and telling us a little bit about what they write. Jay, will you go first?
Yeah. So hey all, I'm Boyce. I write lit RPG, slice of life, isekai, VR MMO type stuff. So fantasy with game elements. So.
I'm Lisa Foster. I write hard science fiction. I won the 2023 Anne Lab Award for Best Novelette. And mostly I write space opera, but I also military SF.
I'm Esther Friesner. I have been at this for quite some time. I think I may be best known for having created the Chicks in Chainmail series, which nobody likes. But I also have done young adult historicals like Nobody's Princess, Nobody's Prize, and I have done many different things, poetry, a little drama, etc., because a moving target is hard to hit.
I'm Joelle Presby, and I am honored to have graduated from being a reader of the Chicks in Chainmail series to finally having a short story in the most recent one. And I write hard science fiction and fantasy. The Dabre Snake Launcher is my most recent novel.
Hi, I'm Wen Spencer. My most recent book is out, and it's the Elf Home book, where I tried to wrap up a war and did not. The main tradition, yeah. And I got bookmarks for people afterwards. Please take them. I don't want to fly them back home with me. I have been at this for a long time, but I've had this 14-year break from being in conventions because I moved to Hawaii, so I'm a little bit rusty.
Hi, I'm Kacey, Ezell. I write science fiction, military science fiction, space opera, alternate history, a little bit of noir, and fantasy now. So, thanks.
And like Kacey, I write lots of different things because I read lots of different things. I write historical fantasy, sometimes with strong romantic elements and sometimes without, for Paul Staff Books. I write space opera with Jeannie Adams, the Outcast Station series, and I write several different kinds of romance. So when we have the title of Then and Now, we need a starting point because otherwise we could go way, way back. So for purposes of our discussion, we're going to start then as the middle of the 20th century, which is, I'm old enough that I'm thinking, how can that be so long ago? But it was. So for those of you who are not as old as I am, some of us on the panel are, in the middle of the 20th century, it was very common for women writing science fiction to use gender-neutral or male-sounding names. And so my first question to the panel is, was there a book that you read that had a male-sounding or gender-neutral name that you just assumed was written by a man at any point in your life? And Kacey, we'll start with you.
Oh, wow, okay. To be honest with you, no. And the only reason that I say that with such definitive authority is because when I was a little girl, the only other people I knew who were named Kacey were boys. So from a very early age, I was like, I am not going to assume that anyone is a boy or a girl based on their name because I hate it when people call me a boy. So, but that's very me, and I apologize. It's not a great answer for the panel.
I don't think there's anything to apologize.
For me, it was C.J. Cherry.
Yes.
I was fairly isolated when I grew up, and I found her in high school and did not realize that she was actually a woman. Interesting corollary is Wen is short for Wendy because I hated Wendy growing up and I didn't want to go by it as a professional, but I've been accused of using the Chinese male Wen name. I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing. So I find it interesting that a lot of people assume that I'm a guy.
I thought Andre Norton was a guy. However, I also thought at first that J.R.R. Tolkien was a girl. I thought everybody with initials was female.
Well, this is horrible. I didn't read a lot of science fiction and fantasy because, hi, I'm a boomer, get off my lawn, etc. And so I grew up with not from my parents, but from society, well, science fiction and fantasy, it's not what girls should be reading. Until the day 17 magazine reviewed Lord of the Rings, and since 17 said it was okay, there I went. But what you said about, Andre Norton is one thing, but J.R.R. initials. A lot of women writers, including friends of mine, had to get published with initials.
Andre Norton is also the only one I can think of.
Philip is a Farber.
I was thinking Andre as well, but J.K. Rowling is probably the next one that I would say. And that's, to be fair, I write in a genre that's 90% male, and when they see J. Boyce, they're like, oh, are you a dude? Even though it's like clearly a 17-year-old girl.
Oh, that was interesting, because I said, why did they put this man J on the panel? Your bio went, oh, my mistake.
Hi, I'm a girl. Figures.
Well, for me, it was A.C. Crispin, whose first book, Yesterday's Sun, was a Star Trek tie-in that came out in 1978. And until I actually saw A.C. Crispin at a convention and discovered that she was she, I had just assumed she was a guy, because they're, again, initials. And it's more, I think, more common, or it was then, for men than for women to write with initials, although certainly not unheard of. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons people chose those names. Esther, you kind of touched on that in your answer before. Would you amplify that, please?
I'm sorry, again, please?
You said that
The initials?
the initials and sounding male, and, or maybe it was Andre Norton.
Yeah, I think it's probably stemmed from the same thing why I wasn't reading fantasy and science fiction, because it was something, I'm a very big follow the directions and no one gets hurt person, and again, my parents were like, yeah, do what you want, it's cool, go ahead. And I'm just like, but 17 magazine, I'll never get a boy this way. But, oh, P.S. I got a boy.
But I think you kept him too.
I did. We're going to be married 50 years. I mean, he's easy to kill, so he stays in life. Anyway, friends of mine some of my friends who got published were actually told, because they were not writing fantasy. Fantasy was okay to have a female name if you were a woman, no problem. But science fiction, they said, people won't buy the book if it's hard science fiction written by, I'm not even going to say a woman, because the kind of brains that we're like, I'm not going to read it, it's written by a girl.
Yeah, I've been told to my face, oh, I don't read fiction by women.
Well, and like in my genre is still 90% male.
Yeah.
Or more like 95% probably. Like out of over 1,000 authors, maybe 20 of us are women. And like there are still at least 80% of the women in the genre have gender neutral names.
Yeah.
Because again, we do have so much, like it was a very sausage fest for a while. And like it was kind of hard to break in. And so like, I still have friends, like my friend Honor Ray. She's clearly a girl writing a dude, but like, for a long time we kept the anonymity there just because like, there were people who would come and judge us based on just the fact that we have different body parts.
So this is really, really interesting to me because, so for context, I was born in 1977, grew up in the, childhood in the 80s and the 90s, and then young adult in the late 90s, early 2000s, okay? In my home, both of my parents were active duty Air Force officers. My dad was the sports bro, big football fan, go Steelers. My father raised me on Pittsburgh Steelers football, but my mother raised me on science fiction and fantasy. So when I was growing up, science fiction was always a girl thing in my head. But I know what I knew because I was always like, Mom, why does everyone in sci-fi write with their initials? And she explained to me that it was for publishing reasons. But it just that's an interesting, fascinating dichotomy that I'm just weird, I guess, because in my head, science fiction is a girly thing.
It's also sometimes for privacy reasons, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
It's women are a lot more scared of being stalked and followed.
Sure.
The other side of that was when I started writing, I wrote all male characters because in my mind, the science fiction and fantasy stories are male characters doing interesting things, and usually the women's stories in the early 70s were Anne McCaffrey and such, where it was a romance and often women would be in supportive roles even if they were the main characters, like Moretta, the queen rider of the biggest were, and she's running around behind the were leader's back so she can save the whole world from the pandemic. Oh, he might find out, we gotta hide it. It was things like that that made me want to write a male. And then somebody finally slapped me and said, no, women.
Does anybody want to add anything to that?
I think sometimes people do it for professional reasons, and I would have had to do that if I would have gotten into this writing thing any sooner, because I had to I had to have pencil in an agreement with the company that I was working for at the time, and pretty much everybody else that I've worked with since, to have them look at anything that I might publish, because they were concerned about their IP somehow being in the science fiction that I would write. So I think a lot of people will use initials for professional reasons.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, for sure.
Joelle, did you want to add anything?
Sure. The going on to the professional reasons thing, I had a conversation with my employer when I was planning the Davray snake launcher, in which a multinational corporation does not necessarily look that beautiful. And I was working for a multinational corporation, and I assured them that I would not mention in the about the author that I had worked for them, because I was leaving employment with them to write full time. And they told me, no, we want you to mention us. So I just find that interesting that in some eras, in some parts of the economy, companies don't want you to be identified as an employee of them, and others, we don't care, even if we're the bad guy, just use our name.
Any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking.
When I was preparing for this panel, I ran across an article on early women science fiction writers, and it talked about Andre Norton changing her name for professional purposes. And it also mentioned something I had not heard before about C.J. Cherry, which was that when she first talked to the publisher, he said, Carolyn Cherry? That sounds like a romance writer name. We can't use that. And she became C.J. Cherry with an H as a result on the end of that. So,
the thing is, a lot of this happens because women have an image in the minds of a lot of people, men and some other women. And part of this image consists of underestimating women. That is not a good thing. I'm friends with Elizabeth Moon. And someone was saying, well, how can she be writing all this military stuff? And then they were told, well, she was a colonel in the Marines, I think it was, something like that.
It was Marines.
It was
Yeah,
the
I
Marines.
don't know her rank, but definitely Marines.
Yeah, she's a
Yes. definitely Marines. And that's the problem, and it gets a little bit, okay, feminist content warning here. It goes back to something I saw in a comic strip, BC, where the two women are talking, and one says, you know, the men are always looking down at us, and the other one says, yes, but why do they put us on a pedestal? And the first one says, because at eye level we bug them.
You know, I grew up reading comic books, much to my mother's great chagrin. And one of my favorite comic books was Adventure Comics, which published the Legion of Superheroes. And the Legion of Superheroes had a female character named Saturn Girl. And in the first issue I read, which was written incidentally by Jerry Siegel, the story was, Saturn Girl found out that there was a prophecy that one Legionnaire was going to die in action against an invader heading for Earth. But we didn't find that out till the end of the story. So she rigged the election for Legion leader so that she won. And then she found all these petty infractions to kick everybody else out of the Legion to ensure that she was the one who was going to go out to face Roxas's raiders. But so that I don't totally, entirely spoil it for you in case you want to read it someday, she was busted by another Legionnaire and she ended up not being the one who died. Saturn Girl has a reputation for, if you will excuse my French, a hard-nosed B-word.
Good.
And I loved her as a little girl, reading this empowered, strong character. But that was the 1960s. And she still has that image today. And so I sort of wonder if the whole women in authority thing still carries over, or if you see it shifting. What do you all think? Joelle, will you start?
Having been a female officer, I've not seen issues with women in authority from my work or in my interactions with the industry. And I realize that I'm in a special position. There could be someone who is coming in at exactly the same time with the same opportunities I had, who was perhaps a little more mild from their experiences before that would have had hardships that I never saw.
Right. Yeah. Wynn, do you have anything to add?
I think that overall we are being allowed different things. I remember when I was a kid, not science fiction, fantasy, Sergeant Pepper, female cop, was woo, because, you know, it had never been before that a woman could lead a TV show. And now it's like, so what? She's a woman, she's the lead. Okay. We're even having the, I'm blanking on the name, the two Boston cops. Where yeah, where it's hinted that they're actually lesbians. And it's kind of like, go us. I'm glad to see that, you know, the differences from early when I was a child of 10 to now, where it's like, oh look, we even have commercials where, you know, we have mixed race families and everything. We've come a long way in media.
Xena.
Well, yeah, it used to be like, the perception was when a man took charge, he was assertive, and when a woman took charge, she was bossy. And that has slowly, I mean, like, there are still probably people who have that perception, but thankfully, like, media has been, like, the world is slowly changing and allowing women to, like, be people, like, just be a person. So, I think it has changed some. It's, like, still got ways to go.
So I have an interesting perspective on this question. Again, for context, you guys, by the end of this panel, you're gonna know my entire life story. For context, I graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1999 and commissioned into the U.S. Air Force. I served 23 years as an Air Force officer, and in addition to that, and retired in 2022. In addition to that, my mom was also an Air Force officer for 24 years and retired as a full colonel. I did did not. I did not reach that rank. As my mom is still someone that I can get to look up to. So that's my background, right? That's what I'm talking about. And in my career, and I've talked with my mom extensively about this because for fun, the woman decided to go get a PhD in leadership. That's who she is as a person. So we have this conversation on and on, consistently, and about leadership and different leadership styles. And the conclusion that I've come to, and that she mostly agrees with me on, it's actually kind of funny, is that sometimes female leaders are still perceived as bossy or bitchy, when we're assertive. Sometimes we're perceived as toxic. But what makes the difference is the genuineness with which that leader is able to connect with their followership. And the same is true of male leaders, right? So toxic male leaders absolutely exist in today's Air Force, I can tell you from personal experience. And what makes them toxic, the toxicity may manifest in different ways, but the one thing that is consistent between female leaders that are considered toxic and male leaders that are considered toxic, and I recognize that I'm giving you gross generalizations here, but go with it for a second, is that piece, right? Do I connect with the people that I am leading? Have I established a genuine dynamic of trust and respect and cooperation with them? If that dynamic exists, then I can be a directive leader, and I can tell you, I can give you an order. It can even be a sharp, quick in the moment, break left, ground fire, type of order. And you're not going to be pissy at me because you understand I'm doing the job, you're doing the job, we're doing a job.
It's nice to not die.
It's nice to not die, right? Like you understand I'm trying to keep us alive, right? However, if we don't have that trust, if we don't have that respect, that mutual respect, that relationship for one another, I snap something at you in the moment, and probably you'll respond, you'll be like, oh my God, that terrible situation where someone was shooting at us was so much worse because she got so bitchy about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I'm just sitting here going, oh, that's why everybody likes Jane.
Well, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was a lawyer. And when I first entered the legal profession, I would go to the county calendar call in the morning, and there would be maybe 2 other people there in skirts. Fast forward several years, and I went to calendar call with a friend after I was out of the profession, and there were so many women in the courtroom that because of my early conditioning, my first thought was not, wow, it's amazing how many women lawyers are handling these cases. It was, wow, all these people sent their admins. Because I got conditioned by my experiences in the profession that very few women were going to be lawyers. And then when I readjusted, I felt so incredibly stupid. So you all cannot tell anybody that I told you this story. If you did.
I'm not going online.
That includes you people on YouTube.
But so we've looked at kind of the societal changes about women in positions of authority and women being assertive. So let's bring that back into the writing world and women writing under apparently female names versus, or a pseudonym could be a female name or initials or whatever. But do you think it's more open now for women to write under female sounding names, even though they may choose not to?
I think it is because Elizabeth Moon got to write as Elizabeth Moon, not as E. Moon. So I think we are making steps forward. I also think there are some people it is ticking off like crazy because it's kind of like the privilege war, if you will. Yeah. Because if you felt you were, if your own life was kind of but at least I'm not fill in the blank. And then when somebody who is a fill in the blank succeeds, you no longer have the prop of being able to justify your own shortcoming and take comfort in, well, at least I'm not that. And when you have successful hard science fiction writers who are women writing under initials or pseudonyms, then the people who have the problem with, I can still say at least I'm not a blank, even if I find out that that is a woman, because I can tell myself, look at the name, not really a woman. They can get rather shirty about these things, and you see it a lot on the internet, don't you?
Anybody want to add anything?
I mean, my genre is still dealing with it because it is a new genre. It's only like 2013, 2014 was when it first started like becoming a real genre. And so, we're still finding it. So I use J not because I thought it was unisex, it's just because that's what I've gone by since I was 10. Like, that was just my natural progression. But it wasn't until so many people were like, "Are you a dude?" And I was like, "No." Or like, my brother also writes in my genre, and they're like, "Are you married? Is he your husband?" I'm like, "No, that's my brother." Thank you. I helped him. He didn't help me.
I have a friend who some years ago entered the Magic the Gathering tournament here at DragonCon. And oh my word, the way the guys in the room reacted to that. "Oh, are you here to hold your boyfriend's seat? Maybe your boyfriend would like to come and play these cards." And she won. But that was like 7 or 8 years ago maybe. And so there was still that resistance to coming into what's seen as a male preserve. And I don't write hard science fiction. I am not a science person. So I leave that to people who are. But I just wonder if coming into science fiction, that same group of people is resistant, and that in turn affects the market. Was that question clear?
Sorry, I'm gonna keep going on mine a little bit because like we have people who ask like, "Oh, are there books about female main characters?" And there are several like people who will be the naysayers who like, "No, the female mains don't do well. They don't sell," and like they like discourage everyone. I'm like, "No, that's not complete. Like, I proved that it can happen. Like, it can work. Like, stop trying to stop them. Stop it."
Okay, can I say something? So I started writing about 2017. At no point was I worried that the name Mona Lisa was going to damage my brand or my sales. I have the scientific background to back up what I write. Nobody told me you should use a male name. Nobody said you need to use your initials. And I don't think it matters. If people don't want to read my hard SF because my name is Mona Lisa, that's their loss.
So one thing I did notice when I first started out, I don't know if it's still true, I used to get locusts and look excitedly to see if I got reviewed. And almost every female book had a one paragraph review, only with the one female reviewer. And every other reviewer was male, and they all reviewed males, and they would get half a page or a quarter page, even if it was their first time novel that hasn't done very well. And it was infuriating that we never got reviewed. Women never got reviewed. And then the pictures that would show up at con meetings, if there was a girl shown, she was pretty, she was blonde, she had a low cut crest. The other standard of the females there who were writing never got the picture in. And this includes when I won the it's not John Campbell, it's Astounding now. You know, the nomination pictures were all the other guys. And I was at that party. And I had been excluded from the group nomination picture. And
What?
Because they knew you were going to be the winner, and they lost your photo.
no, it was just we're doing a party and we're doing pictures of men. And more the pretty girls. And I stopped getting the locus. So that's why I don't know what it does anymore. But it was a lot of very frustrating. As a woman, I wasn't getting any coverage.
And people can blame you that you were pretending to be a man because you hid your photo.
Yeah, using the name when. I will say, you know, in the spirit of the then and now, I guess. I will say that I started writing professionally. My first pro sale was in 2010, but I didn't really start writing professionally consistently until about 2015 or so. So I'm kind of the same generation as Mona Lisa, I guess, if you want to think of it in those terms. And I have not personally experienced that same sort of difficulty, right? So I'm hopeful that means that, like you said, Esther, I think we're coming a long way. My experience has been that if you tell a good story, if you have the background to support the details in your story, if you're writing something like hard science fiction or mill sci-fi in my case, or whatever, or alternately, if you don't have that background but you're good at research and you do your research properly, people are going to be interested in your story and they're going to be enthusiastic about you or me or whatever. So that's good, I guess. We got that going for us, right?
Okay, I started having my novels published in 1985. Continue to stay off my lawn. Please do. It's just a mess anyway. There were glimmers of hope. Now, I was removed from the whole stigma of being a girl because I was writing fantasy, which is okay for girls to write. But I had several books out. I was doing a signing back in the day when brick and mortar bookcases roamed in huge herds. And I was
I'll go both ways.
Yay! And I was doing a signing in a mall near New London. And you know, New London has got a heavy military, in Connecticut, a heavy military presence. And here come these two guys in their, uniforms and with the haircut and everything, and say, "Oh, yeah, I read that book, and I have a bone to pick with you." And I'm thinking, I screwed up the battle, didn't I? I screwed up the battle. I'm about to get just gotten. And he says, "Why did you let her marry him?" And I was like, "What's a glimmer of hope?"
Well, Esther brings up an interesting point, because a lot of people I know did not initially realize that the White Dragon was in fact science fiction. But because, it's got dragons.
Yes.
Dragons are fantasy. And it happens to be the first science fiction book by a woman to make the New York Times list. And I'm wondering if that helped to break the logjam. What do you all think?
Couldn't have hurt.
So Mona Lisa, will you start?
I'm not familiar with it. I'm more of a science fiction.
Well, let me rephrase it.
I can start.
Okay, Joelle?
Well, so speaking from the now perspective, that was a book that I knew of and that I grew up reading. It certainly helped make me think that this is something that women have always done. And then once I started being published, and my publisher was Bain Books with Tony Weisskopf at the helm, it did not occur to me that there were any limits on what women could do in this field especially in hard science fiction, and myself having been a Navy nuclear power engineer, and definitely not being the first at anything as a female in my field.
Yeah. Can I go? I'm like dying to answer this question. So some of you know this already because I've told this story at least 3 times already this con. But I literally based my entire life and entire personality on Anne McCaffrey's Fern. I am not kidding you. The reason I am a pilot to this day, I flew helicopters for 23
Dragons
years.
were not available.
Don't steal my thunder, Joelle. I literally wanted to be a dragon rider so bad. I was like, screw it, I'm gonna learn to fly anyway. And that is the reason I'm a pilot today, is the reason I write science fiction. So yeah, I am with Joelle. Reading those books and knowing that they were considered science fiction, because I loved them so much. I read them cover to include all of the author's notes, all of the dragon decks with all the names in the back, like all of it, every bit of it. And in one of those author's notes was a brief history of how Anne had written the Weir Search story. And had sold it to a science fiction magazine, and that her editor had said, you know, these people need to be like colonists from Earth or descended from colonists from Earth. And at first she didn't want to do that, but a wise author listens to her editor, and so she did it. And then the story sold. I told you I like memorized these books, right? And so yes, I've always considered them to be science fiction. And when I was a little kid, people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up. The answer was a dragon rider. But when you're 10 and you tell people you want to be a dragon rider, they're like, you're a weird kid, right? So I learned to mask, and I said, I want to write science fiction novels. Here we are. Thank you, Anne.
The White Dragon was actually my first hardcover book.
Nice.
Well, I have to tell a little thingy here. I wrote a book called New York by Night. It's a knight and a dragon duking it out in New York City. And she was at a convention, and she said, oh, I saw that book. I like your dragon. Oh! And it was an evil dragon.
There were similar confusion, at least among a lot of people I knew, about Darkover and Marion Zimmer Bradley. And, I grew up with an old Southern mother. My father was not Old South, so we had an interesting mixture there. But I was always taught that Marion with an O was a guy, and Marion with an A was a woman. And the only reason I did not get so confused about that is that a friend of mine got out of her car, shoved, and now I'm blanking on the book about the free Amazons of Darkover in my face, and she said, this woman is wonderful, you will love this. And you know what? I did. But I knew a lot of other people who were confused by the spelling of Marion Zimmer Bradley's name. And Darkover is science fiction. It's another world, it's colonist immigrants, but it's got all these woo-woo powers. And so I think a lot of people thought it was fantasy. And so what I was trying to get at with the prior question was just breaking through, having a book by a woman on the New York Times list that said science fiction on the spine, no matter what the popular perception of it was, maybe helped to support the idea that women could in fact write science fiction. And I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay, well, I'm gonna kind of switch it up a little bit, because so good RPG is so new, and so like major publishing houses don't even look at us, and they hadn't looked at us until Travis Baldry and Matt Dinniman got deals, and now they're getting into bookstores, and like that breakthrough is so important for our genre. And that has been a huge step forward for us, because we're like, okay, so they just carved a little path for us, and now the rest of us can like say, hey, we exist. We have a fan base. They're rabid. Let's give them books. Please. So like having that first forerunner is always really important, because it shows people, oh hey, like this can be done. And so I think it's a similar thing. One person leads the way, and everybody else is like, oh, hey, well, maybe that's not a bad idea. Let's give this a shot.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling's in Harry Potter, where it was a brick, and up to that children's books were supposed to be under 40,000 words, and then, you know, we've got the, oh no, they can read bricks. Suddenly everybody jumps on that bandwagon.
And we have many bricks.
Yeah, many bricks now.
Well, we're coming up to the time where we should throw it open to everyone else for questions. But before we do that, I'm curious to know, what was the first science fiction book by a woman that you remember reading and loving?
Dragon Song.
Dragon Drums.
Dragon Drums.
Yeah, I was 7 years old. Dragon Drums by Anne McCaffrey.
Yep.
Yeah, that was
Huh.
pretty much it. I mean, anything Anne wrote, I actually loved. I mean, Restory, I can't remember if I'd gotten that, or Decision at Duna was another one that I think might have been before Dragons. I don't remember the actual order, but almost everything she put out I liked a lot. For some reason, I had only found one, Andrea Norton, and I liked it, but that was a period of time that I only could get what was in the library, and my library only had that one book.
I don't have a science fiction one, but I have like a, not exactly fantasy, but a myth retelling. 7th grade Mary Renault, The King Must Die.
Oh, yeah.
And I loved mythology of all sorts, and this was required reading in our school for the 7th grade. And I simply said, you can take myths and explain them, and then I got, you can twist them, and you can just take them and, you know, pet them and hug them and call them George. So I guess Mary Renault, because the thing is, I don't remember, I remember reading a lot of books, and I remember being encouraged by my parents to read a lot of comic books. But, you know, not, although at one time I caught sight of Modesty Blaze in the, is anyone familiar with Modesty Blaze? Yeah. Oh, talk about your kick-ass heroines, but it was in comics. Man, she was scary.
Yeah, my library wasn't broken into segments as to, it was all A to Z, and nothing on the card catalog ever indicated it was fantasy, science fiction. So I basically just read everything. And if I was lucky, I would stumble across somebody like Heinlein and go, oh, he's got lots of books here. And then read all the Heinleins and then start going randomly until I hit somebody else. And go, oh, there's a lot of books here. Those are cool.
There were a lot of books I liked, but the first one I really, really loved that was science fiction by a woman was Shards of Honor by Lois McMaster Bushell.
Yes. She's probably my favorite author. I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but I'm drawing a blank. But I think it had to be something by Lee Brackett. For me. Yeah. And I think the other ones might have been Janet Morris.
Mercedes Lackey's as well, the Aquinas series. And those.
For me, it was The White Dragon. We were on vacation at the beach with my family, and the only place to buy books was the grocery store, was the drugstore. And they had The White Dragon, and I devoured it. And lucky for me, they had Dragonflight, and the one that comes after it. And so,
Dragon Quest.
I knew you would know. You would know. Yeah. And I really loved those books, and I still have those battered copies of those paperbacks
With the Michael Whalen covers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have some time left. Does anybody have questions? Yes, over here.
Especially for new writers, what advice would you give just specifically for the very daunting task of, and also just what do you look for in an editor?
So the question is, what do we look for in an editor?
Yes.
They buy my stuff.
I'll tell you, I am happy to have an editor who will tell me, well, you should change this, and if I feel not, and I say why, they give me a cogent reason. I have had way in the past an editor who basically says, change it, just change it. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
What am I fixing?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But because it was early in my career, and when it's early in your career, sometimes you don't want to say the wrong thing lest the person with the power to say, well, and that's the end of your career.
Yeah.
But if you're lucky, you will get an editor who will have a dialogue with you and who wants to see your book be the best thing it can be, but will be willing to listen to your reason behind your, I don't want to change that.
Yeah. So a couple of context questions here to follow on. First is, who is paying for the editor? If you are looking to self-publish, or you are looking to hire an editor to help you make your book the best it can be before you submit it to a publisher, understand that the editor is going to work for you. So you need to make sure that you have found someone who is going to give you the service that you want in exchange for your money, okay? So what does that mean? Well, if I am trying to write lit RPG and I don't know how to do that, but I've written something that I think is good and that I think matches the tropes, I don't want to go to my favorite romance editor and ask her, because it's probably a her, to edit my book. She might be able to do a solid copy edit for it, but she's not going to be able to give me any kind of valuable developmental edit or line edit advice, right? So you want to make sure that you, first of all, know what kind of edit you want, whether it's a line, developmental, copy edit, etc. Second, that you find an editor who is going to be able to work within the genre that you're trying to produce, and knows what the tropes and expectations of that genre are going to be, so that you can match up with them. That's if you are hiring the editor yourself. If you have contracted with a publisher,
You don't have a choice.
who is well, you don't necessarily have a choice, but you do have input, right? And this is one of the things that I often tell young authors who are coming in to work with the indie press that I work a lot with, Chris Kennedy Publishing. It's like, look, these editors, they are all our friends. We all know each other, but they are good people. However, if their style and your style is incompatible, the important thing is the book. And so try to communicate with them, ask them the questions, and if you find that it just doesn't work, communicate with the publisher and say, hey, look, no harm, no foul, I just don't think that this is working out, and see what your options are. But remember, it kind of does really depend on who is paying the bill.
And as an editor turned author, I will say, like, it is important to do a test edit before.
Yes.
Do like a chapter, make sure that you know what kind of editing they're going to be giving you, and if it's at the right price point for you, and if it is the right kind of editing
Yes.
that you need.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
it's so important to do that. And
I have found that I get rarely edited, and it's sometimes really frustrating. You send in a manuscript and it comes back with little line edits and things like rifles don't have silencers. It's like, yes, Tony, okay. On like maybe page 400, there's a little smiley face. And that is all the feedback I get. I had one editor that...
It must be hard to be so good.
I'm jealous of your smiley face.
He wanted me to change the beginning of something, and I was like, that's kind of like a house of cards. If I take that out, this problem happens. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay, you can leave it in. See if you can massage it a little bit. But the interesting, he didn't give me a whole lot of input. That was actually my second editor, Penguin, but he gave me a full-page discord on how my character's point of view on Batman was wrong. And then he quit and took a job at DC. Really, the book publishers want a polished book because they don't know if you can rewrite. And once you prove that you can rewrite, you get very little feedback, I feel. you crave people to tell you to do things better, and you're like, oh, that's good enough, let's go.
I will say utilize your communities.
Yeah.
You're gonna get like recommendations are probably the best resource you have. Like find people who are working in the genre who are doing that, and find who, like, ask them who their editors are. And a lot of the time they'll be happy to tell you. Sometimes they won't because they're really protective of their time, and they're like, if I give you their book, they won't be able to do mine.
Which is kind of gross.
It is kind of gross, but like there are people who are like that, and I'm like, okay. But most people are like happy to like, hey, yeah, they totally need, like, this person works really great for me, and they will give you recommendations.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a funny editor story that's short. Back when editor, a woman, we're still friends, she's no longer an editor, but we're still friends. And I couldn't decide on one of my next books with her. I said, well, I've got this wonderful idea, and I told her, I said, but I haven't decided if my protagonist is going to be male or female. It's like that version of the gender reveal party. And she said, you're going to have a boy. Not in those words, sorry. But then she said, because Esther, basically, you are a 14-year-old boy. And I said, this is going to come as a surprise at home. To this day, I don't know what that meant.
There was another question over here. Yes.
I only recognize, with my apologies, a few of you, so I was wondering if you could go down the panel and tell us what book we should look at if we are not familiar with your work.
The question is, he's not familiar with everyone on the is not familiar with everyone on the panel and would like us each to say what book of ours they should start with if they're not familiar with our work. Kacey, you want to start?
Sure. So okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you multiple recommendations. If you're into alternate history, I would check out Minds of Men. It is my book about psychic women at war. It is set in World War II. That's the first book of my first trilogy. If you are into darker alternate history, you can check out The Romanov Rescue, but it's real dark. That's by Bain.
But great fun.
It is great fun, yes. It is also real dark. And I co-wrote that with Justin Watson and Tom Kratman. If you are into military science fiction, you can check out Assassin, which is not it's sort of military science fiction, but it's in a military science fiction universe. I co-wrote that with Marisa Wolf. And if you're into space opera, please check out The Queen's Fixer, which is my latest series out by me.
I'd probably say my book Tinker, which starts the series. And they did a reprint of it, and it's in digital and the Audible and everything, so it should be easy to track down. Some of the earlier stuff is hard to find.
I'd go with the Dabare Snake Launcher, and I know that it's hard to spell, so I have bookmarks up here. You can just come up and grab one. It's about a family of West African oil barons building a hypersonic space launcher up the side of a mostly friendly volcano with the help of a not-so-friendly water spirit named Mamiwata, which is necessary to build Earth's first space elevator. Hard science fiction.
Well, as I said, I've been at this for a while, so a number of the books are out of print, but again, it's a question of which genre, because I've had 43 novels published. So most recently, one of my favorite things was the young adult series, The Princesses of Myth. So Nobody's Princess and Nobody's Prize. I imagined the girlhood of Helen of Troy. And boy, did I have fun with that. And then it went on. I did Nefertiti, I did Himiko of Japan, and and I did Queen Maeve of Ireland. I was very fascinated. She was killed with a piece of cheese. It was very hard cheese. No, seriously, this guy put it in a sling and got her right between the eyes with this piece of cheese. Not making it up. Well, they made it up. I don't care. The Chicks in Chainmail books, they're not all mine, but because they're anthologies, but I have some stories in them. It's a lot of fun. And I'm kind of sad I had this really scary, like super dark series I started with White Wolf, The Psalms of Herod and The Sword of Mary. Good luck finding there was going to be more, but they didn't sell, and White Wolf kind of went back to just doing games. But I met N.K. Jemisin, and she told me I scared her badly. And she autographed one of her books for me to Esther, who scared the out of me. So that's good too. And oh God, things with cats, wishing season, and lots of stuff. Go look me up on Wikipedia.
My answer is pretty short. This actually covers 3 genres. Military, Ezell, space opera, and Western. So if you like any of those, this is where to start threading the needle for Afro-Man.
I was going to say your title because I was afraid you weren't going to.
Thank you. Like for me, it's pretty easy. I have 2 series: Siphon, which is kind of like Portal Fantasy Chaos Gremlin, and Lotus Lake, which is a VR MMO gamer introvert.
For me, if you want science fiction or space opera-ish science fiction, welcome to Outcast Station, which Jeannie Adams and I wrote together. If you like alternate history, and especially if you are a Ricardian, and you like strong romantic elements in your books, The Herald of Day would be the first book in that trilogy. And if you like paranormal romance, Renegade Mage. And I have a handful of freebie downloads up here for various books. It's kind of a sampler, actually, the download page. So that's it for me. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yes.
Sure. When I hear people talk about like seminal women science fiction writers, usually Ursula K. Le Guin is brought up. And I kind of read her books at the same time I read Anne McCaffrey's, so I'm like, they're connected as like prominent female science fiction writers in my brain. So I'm curious, kind of where you guys place her in, you know, the context of women in science fiction then and now, and also her influence on your works in that age.
I have to apologize because I didn't catch the name.
Ursula K. Le Guin.
Oh, thank you. I don't. The question is, Ursula K. Le Guin is also considered a seminal science fiction writer. And what influence, if any, does she have on our work, and where do we place her
in the context?
In the context.
So this is the Towers of Earth.
The Lake of Heaven was one of those I still own, that I worship. But those all things where I came too late. I didn't find the RC until like after I got out of college. So that's the only reason why she's not in the very beginning of people who influenced me.
I feel like I keep talking about my mom on this panel, so I'm sorry. Her mom's great. Yeah, my mom is awesome. But she was not a fan of Ursula K. Le Guin, just personal preference. She was like, yeah, I think the stories are really good, I just couldn't get into them. So we didn't have any in the house, so I didn't read them. So, however, that being said, I do recognize like her importance to the field, right? Because she did inspire so many people, and her name, you ask where she stands in the, you know, in the canon. She is in the stars along with Anne McCaffrey and Andre Norton and yeah, for sure.
I think I read Ursula K. Le Guin too early. I grew up in West Africa where the native language around me were tribal languages and French, and I could speak other languages, but I was only literate in English, and so there was a limited number of books, and I read them all not necessarily at an appropriate age to really understand it. Like I read The Scarlet Letter attempted to read The Scarlet Letter and got from first page to last page in second grade, and I did not understand this was the worst alphabet book ever.
Take letters with that. I read them when I was like 9, and I'm like, I understood every word. I have no idea what this book is
So
about.
I had a very similar low level of reading comprehension. Like I don't understand why people like this book.
Yeah, I read The Silence of the Lambs at 12 because my mom had it.
I read Dante's Divine Comedy because I was on a great books I must read to be smart in 7th grade, and I got through hell, and I said, that's so cool. And then I got to, not limbo. Purgatory.
The
And,
Purgatorio.
okay. And then I got to heaven, I'm like, I'm bored. Then I read it later, and when I got through the whole thing, and it was Dorothy Sayers' annotated version, and when you got to the last thing, when he's in the prima mobile and beheld that which moves the sun and other stars, I'm sitting going, oh, Dante.
I have not read her, so I really can't comment.
I was like, I read it as a kid, but it's been so long that I only vaguely recall things.
But we want you to still love your stuff.
Yes, because if we all love the same thing, we wouldn't need more than a couple of writers, ever. But I read The Left Hand of Darkness too soon, and I didn't understand it, and I didn't really get into it. I loved Earthsea, and her essays on writing called From Elfland to Poughkeepsie are wonderful. I mean, that's probably my favorite Le Guin book because it spoke the most to me.
One thing about, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
One thing about, I read the Earthsea, and just the introduction, and I'm crying because she's out there dancing and she doesn't know she's being taken by her from her family, and it was just so beautifully written, and I'm losing it all over the place. It was just,
Well, I'm sorry, but we need to wrap up there. So before we conclude, let's have everybody tell people where they can find you for the rest of the weekend. And Jay, will you start?
Yeah, so all of my stuff is on Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, Amazon, Audible. I also have 6 more panels, so I've got 5 tomorrow. So just looking at you out.
You can find me online as well on lisafoster.com and fame.com, and this is my last panel at this con, so
Nice.
and I'm on Facebook being very political. I guess is how I'm being. I'm leaving tomorrow. My last panel is at 11:30, and then I'm running like a rabbit because I have to catch a plane. But I will be on the historically speaking panel, Women Who Changed the Tide of History, over in the Cortland Grand in the Macon room. And if you come, I will tell you the story of Kubaba, the beer woman, who not only she's in the Sumerian kings list, she actually became both a curse and a goddess. She is also Kathleen Carrico, who is why we have, vaccines for COVID.
All right, Joelle Presby, The Missing Volume over at the Vendors Hall has my books, and I've got one more signing there tomorrow at 3. Also tomorrow morning at 10, my next panel is possibly with Kacey. Kacey might crash it. It's about the dragons of Pern. And Bay.com for books and things.
I've got a signing tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the Missing Volumes, and I've got a panel Monday, Fish Out of Water. We're in over your head. Monday at 1 o'clock, somewhere down here. And I have a Patreon that I share a lot of stuff with. I natter about my working process, and things are going well and things are not going well, and sometimes daily progress and things like that. And it's when Spencer at the Patreon, and I have a website, normanspencer.com, that has links to everything.
I'm Kacey Ezell. You can find me on the internet at kaceyezell.net or .com. Either one works. Here at the con, I have a signing tomorrow at 11 and then another one Monday at noon, both with the missing volume over in the AmeriSmart. I also have books for sale there, so you can go check those out if that sounds good. As far as other panels, besides the Pern panel that I'm crushing, I will be over in the Cortland Grand tomorrow, Sunday. Is it Saturday? Yeah, Saturday, okay. Welcome to DragonCon. I will be over in the Cortland Grand at 1 for a master class altering history with time travel, and then back here in this room tomorrow night at 10 for Total Jerks in Science Fiction, aka the A-Hole panel. So that's a lot of fun. Please come check it out.
You can find my website at nancynorthcott.com. My books are available online and some from Falstaff Books. Tomorrow I am on 2 panels in the alt history class. There's a panel on the Masters of the Air miniseries, and then one directly after it on historical romance novels. And Monday I'm in the writer's track talking about From Myth to Magic. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.